talk. So please don't talk, swallow, or blink. Okay. So we're going to get going in just a minute. There is so much to do in Haifa. It's hard to narrow it down. So if this talk is supposed to last about 45 minutes, and I hope that will get us all the way through the Crusades and up to the modern time. But if you have to leave because for one reason or another there's a bingo game, or you want to start a fight in the bar, yeah, that happens a lot on this boat. You just get up and leave, it's okay. You can give me a walking ovation as you go. But I understand not everybody can hang in there to the end. Okay. So again, just to introduce myself, if you haven't been to any of my other talks, my name is Jeffery Luhn. I'm a photography and history teacher in Santa Cruz, California at the college level. Those two disciplines actually go together a lot more frequently than you might think. If you like to travel like I do and go to historic sites and then take pictures, it's a natural blending. And that's why I encourage you to come to my next talk, which is right before we get to the Suez Canal, and also to take the 4 remaining photography lectures if you haven't done that. One of them specializes in cell phone photography. So if you're not very adept at photography and you don't have a full grown-up adult camera, you just have your cell phone, that class, that lecture is going to be really good for you because you'll learn some tips on your cell phone that are very, very useful. And cell phones are good. There's no reason you can't take good vacation pictures with a cell phone, as long as you go to interesting places and you hang out with nice people and don't get into any bar fights. And this does look kind of like a rough crowd. So all of my talks happen at 1 o'clock. This is the only one in the Top Hat Lounge. The rest of them are downstairs in the theater. So we only have 45 minutes for this talk. As I said, it's going to run a little bit longer because I want to get through 400,000 years of history. And then I'm going to get some lunch, and then I'm going to head over to the Schooner Bar to pick up my medication. So here we go. With a little bit of exploration, you can see a lot in Haifa. And I'm going to include as much as I can in my talk about the artifacts, the history, and the locations. Haifa sits in a region that's rich in history and innovation. And it all begins a long time ago, in about 400,000 years ago. The first seaports in the Western world, the breakthroughs in metallurgy that took humanity from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. There were vitally important kingdoms and empires, the region where Christianity was born, and more. All of that is in and around Haifa. So the challenge is to decide what you want to see most. If you're a history buff, what period interests you? Perhaps you just want to skip the ancient history and you maybe visit the Baha'i temple and the beautiful gardens. They were just opened to the public in 2001. I have not seen them yet, but I understand they are spectacular. This photograph gives you an idea about what it looks like. Hey Nick, could you turn down the house lights a little bit so the screen will get darker? So there are artifacts in museums, there's ruins on the seashore, there's opportunity to explore the old town, walk along the coast, you can just soak up the environment. It's a chance to see a modern and a very old Israeli city. There's good food in Haifa, so you'll probably be there for lunch and you'll be able to get some great food. Israel has really good food. So this presentation concentrates on ancient history. and it goes all the way up to 1948, to the creation of Israel. I can't give you advice on where you are to go for your land adventures, but I'm going to give you the historic perspective, and then you can speak to the excursion people about where you want to go. There are a lot of excursions. There's something for everybody there, and I'll be taking an excursion for sure. There are some security concerns in Israel, and if you are concerned, I'd recommend that you do the escorted tour. So let's get started by looking at a timeline. And if you haven't done much dating, let me point out how the timeline works. So in the timeline, the middle of the timeline is the year 1, when Jesus was born. So after that point, the numbers go up. But before the year 1 or the year 0, the numbers go up but backwards. So in other words, over here we have 3500 BC, and as we get closer, we count down to 1200 BC, 500 BC, 44 BC, and then we start again at 1 going in the other direction. So the period back here is called BCE, before the Common Era, and it's the same as BC, before Christ. The period that is after, which we historians refer to as CE, that is what is also known as AD, Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord. So, educators usually just call it the Common Era. So if you hear me, I just switch them around. I never pay much attention to what I'm saying, actually, about anything. That gives you a lot of faith, doesn't it? The Common Era, which we'll talk about here, is loaded with all kinds of great stuff about Haifa. And the high point, really, after this period, well, right here, right after the year 1, we see the collapse of Egypt when Rome conquers Egypt. It gets really tough for Israel at that time. And then the Crusades was not a picnic, despite what Hollywood has to say about it. So Napoleon made an appearance around here, and then the creation of Israel was here. Going backwards, the Persians are here, the Assyrians, the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, and early prehistoric times. So let's get started. The list of historic figures that left footprints in this area is like a who's who of Western civilization. The ancient warrior kings comprise a list that is just too long to mention, including my favorite, Alexander the Great. He walked right through Haifa. There was no traffic then. And people just tended to move out of the way for him anyway, because it was a little imposing. In fact, when an army that big would walk through a region, they could drain the resources so bad that it could take a year or 2 to recover. But I'll get to that. Herod, the king of Judea, also hosted Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, Caesar Augustus, and many other people at his beach house that was 25 miles south of Haifa. A lot of ruins from that area still remain. Actually, historians call this not a beach house, they call it a pleasure palace. It was over the top. Herod, he was just a spectacular builder, and he just loved to throw parties. It was like he was greedy. He loved opulence. We'll talk more about him as well. So it's worth mentioning that a special mix of hydraulic cement was developed by Herod's engineers because he wanted to build this house on the waterfront, and they said it can't be done. And he said, "Do it or I'll kill you." And that's how inventions are made. Let's face it. I would invent something new if someone put that to me. And they invented hydraulic concrete, which sets underwater. So that allowed Herod to build his pleasure palace and also create a very impressive port in Caesarea, which is about 25 miles south of Haifa. So the question is, why did so many people pass this way? What's so great about this? And the short answer is that ocean travel was safer and it was faster at the time. And so the shipping routes that we see here, here's Haifa and here's Genoa and Venice. The shipping routes were established back then, and they continue to be in use today. So that's how ships, the Phoenician ships and Greek ships and Roman ships, that's where they traveled. And if they wanted to go farther east, then they would make a landfall in Haifa or Tyre, which is to the north, or Caesarea was to the south. People traveled by ship to the easternmost part of the Mediterranean, and then they either bumped along the coast in their ships or they walked overland, and then they would cross the Sinai Desert right here, get on another ship in the Red Sea, and then they would head out, heading east. And that is the route of Marco Polo, and he took that route in about 1270 AD, something like that. So it was really well established by that time. But people were familiar with that route around the time that Christ was